Imagine a chessboard where every single move could lead to global instability, where these crucial decisions about nuclear capabilities, well, they hang in a really precarious, almost explosive balance. That's the kind of tension we're diving into today on the Deep Dive. We've meticulously pulled together a whole stack of sources, everything from granular official briefings to breaking news reports and deep expert analyses.
All focused squarely on Iran's nuclear program.
Exactly.
Our mission today is to really unpack the recent U.S. and Israeli military strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, understand the current sort of fluid state of Iran's capabilities, and then perhaps most critically, explore the incredibly complex diplomatic pathways that lie ahead.
Yeah.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll gain, we hope, a clear, nuanced picture of what's been happening on the ground, what the stakes truly are for global security, and, what the immediate future might hold for this critical, evolving global issue.
That's right. Our goal is to distill the essential facts, the key insights, so you can cut through the noise, understand the motivations perhaps, and feel genuinely well-informed about, well, one of the most pressing geopolitical challenges of our time.
Okay.
Okay, let's unpack this. So let's begin by setting the scene for these pretty dramatic events.
Right.
For well over a year, diplomatic efforts to get Iran to halt its uranium enrichment had completely stalled.
Just going nowhere.
We're talking about a period where talks simply weren't moving forward. Iran rejecting U.S. proposals as recently as early June. This diplomatic impasse, this deadlock, it truly served as the catalyst for what came next.
Indeed. And what came next was a series of recent U.S. and Israeli airstrikes, which were dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer.
Right.
Its primary, unequivocal objective was pretty clear: to severely set back Iran's uranium enrichment capabilities and, crucially, to disrupt its accelerating progress toward developing nuclear weapons.
And when we talk about severity and scale here, it's quite profound, isn't it?
It really is.
We're talking about 12 30,000-pound GBU-57 bunker buster bombs dropped on Fordo alone.
12. That's huge.
The reports indicate these bombs, weighing over 180 tons each, detonated inside the heavily fortified facility after traveling through its ventilation shafts.
Wow.
So this wasn't indiscriminate bombing. It directly targeted the critical centrifuge cascade halls.
And according to sources, likely destroyed all 6 IR-1 and 7 IR-6 cascades.
Which were the ones making most of the highly enriched uranium.
Exactly. These were the very cascades responsible for producing nearly 90% of Iran's 60% enriched uranium.
That is undeniably a significant operational blow.
Oh, absolutely. And IAEA Director Rafael Grossi, he's the head of the Global Nuclear Watchdog,
Right.
He confirmed on June 26th that the Fordo centrifuges are no longer working. He even emphasized that small vibrations can destroy them.
Which underscores the precision, I guess, and the sheer destructive power of these strikes against the facilities themselves.
Definitely.
What's truly illuminating, though, is looking at the differing assessments of the damage.
Yes, that's always the case, isn't it?
It tells you so much about the inherent fog of war and intelligence. You had President Trump, for example, claiming the sites were obliterated.
Very strong, very political language.
Yeah. But then the intelligence community, like the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, they offered a more cautious view.
More nuanced, yeah. Assessing moderate to severe damage, but notably with low confidence.
Because it was an early assessment.
Exactly. Still gathering intel.
Huh?
Then you had CIA Director John Ratcliffe stating several key Iranian nuclear facilities were destroyed and would have to be rebuilt over the course of years.
So another perspective suggesting major damage.
Precisely. And Grossi from the IAEA, the body actually trying to get access on the ground, he sort of cuts through some of that noise.
Also,
He offered a more balanced view, calling it severe damage, but pointedly stating it was not total damage.
okay.
Stressing that Iran retains its industrial and technological capacities. Your real insight here isn't just that it's hard to get a definitive picture from the outside.
Right.
It's how this very uncertainty can be strategically leveraged or perhaps mismanaged by different actors. It forces everyone to operate with incomplete information, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And crucially, these strikes didn't just hit nuclear facilities, did they?
No, that's a key point. They also targeted broader Iranian military infrastructure, impacting their ability to project power more widely.
Like what specifically?
Well, we saw missile storage facilities at the IRGC Aerospace Force Bakhtarin missile base hit. Satellite imagery apparently showed severe damage. collapsed bunker entrances,
Okay.
plus a drone storage facility at the IRGC Navy's first Saheb-ul-Zaman regional base in Bandar Abbas was also reportedly targeted.
So a wider campaign than just the nuclear program.
Absolutely, the strategic impact was wide-ranging. But, as with any military action of this scale, the profound human cost cannot and must not be overlooked either.
That's very true. What are the reports on that?
Tragically, reports indicate at least 627 civilian deaths in Iran from these strikes, and 28 in Israel from the retaliatory strikes that followed.
Grim numbers.
Very. And notably, an Israeli missile strike on Tehran's Evin prison on June 23rd reportedly killed 71 people, including judiciary staff.
Wow.
And the strikes also killed an estimated 200 to 300 IRGC and Basij members by hitting their headquarters in Tehran. This stark reality just underscores the immense stakes for all involved.
And it's precisely against this somber backdrop of severe human cost and heightened tension that, kind of paradoxically, a new diplomatic window might be opening.
It's possible. That seems to be the hope anyway.
The U.S. in particular seems to view these military actions as having created a potential opening for renewed negotiations.
Right. The hope or the calculation is that these strikes will bring Iran back to the negotiating table to make meaningful concessions.
And there are some signs Iran might be considering it.
Well, Iran is now apparently signaling a desire to de-escalate and has accepted a U.S.-brokered ceasefire. So that's movement.
The core idea here being that negotiations from this new asserted position of strength might have a better, maybe more realistic chance of success than before.
That's the strategic calculus, yes. However, despite the severe setbacks to its facilities, what's fascinating here is Iran's underlying resilience.
Meaning the knowledge is still there.
Exactly. IAEA Director General Grossi has repeatedly emphasized that Iran still retains the fundamental knowledge and industrial capacity to resume uranium enrichment in a matter of months, potentially even sooner.
Months? That quickly?
That's what he suggests. He underscored, quote, Iran has the capacities there, industrial and technological capacities. So if they so wish, they will be able to start doing this again.
And he added?
He added, pointedly, the knowledge is there. The industrial capacity is there. Iran is a very sophisticated country in terms of nuclear technology.
So while you can damage the buildings, the expertise remains.
Precisely. The intellectual and industrial foundation is intact.
Okay, so we've talked about the damage to the facilities, the buildings, the centrifuges. But what about the actual material, the uranium itself?
Ah, yes, that's the critical next piece of the puzzle.
Because the reports suggest the stockpile wasn't necessarily destroyed.
That's right. While the facilities were certainly hit hard, Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile remains largely intact, according to sources. This is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, concerning.
And they have different levels of enrichment stockpiled.
Correct. Iran still possesses significant stockpiles of 3-5% enriched uranium, which is, reactor grade for power plants.
Okay.
Then there's 20% enriched uranium, and critically, 60% enriched uranium.
And the 60% is the really worrying one.
It is. It's important to clarify the technical difference here because this is crucial for understanding the proliferation risk. For power plants, uranium needs maybe 3-5% enrichment.
Standard stuff.
Right. For nuclear weapons, it's above 90%.
Right.
What makes the 60% stockpile so concerning is that enrichment isn't a linear process, it's logarithmic.
Theming.
Imagine climbing a steep hill. The last few steps to the summit are far easier once you're already near the top.
Okay, I get it.
The closer Iran gets to weapons grade, the faster and less energy intensive that final leap becomes. It dramatically reduces what we call the breakout time.
Which is the time needed to actually make enough material for a bomb.
Exactly. The time needed to produce enough weapons-grade material for one nuclear bomb.
And the danger is very real then, with that much 60% stuff around.
It is. Iran's 60% enriched uranium is just below weapons grade and could theoretically produce more than 9 nuclear bombs if refined further.
9 bombs worth. That's significant.
To put a number on it, as of February 2025, Iran's combined stockpile of 60% and 20% enriched uranium was nearly 900 kilograms.
And the IAEA itself has warned about this.
Yes, the IAEA has warned Iran has enough uranium for potentially 6 nuclear weapons. That's a staggering figure, especially when you consider the IAEA's admitted uncertainty about these existing stockpiles.
They don't know where it all is.
Well, the IAEA has expressed serious concern about the rapidly growing stockpile and, as you noted, acknowledges they do not know whether the stockpile was moved before the bombings or partially destroyed.
So they don't know if it was hit or moved beforehand.
Right. Grossi himself stated there has to be at some point a clarification.
So even after these massive strikes, we're essentially flying blind on one of the most critical pieces, the existing bomb-making material. That must make any future monitoring, any negotiation incredibly difficult.
It creates significant uncertainty, for sure. A huge challenge.
So amidst all this, what's Iran's consistent public line? What do they say they're doing?
They have always maintained their nuclear program is solely for civilian purposes, primarily energy.
Which is interesting given their oil and gas reserves.
It is. They cite energy diversification as a rationale. They also assert their stated right to enrich uranium on Iranian soil as a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
And they've been pretty defiant about stopping enrichment.
Oh, yes. They've consistently stated they will never stop enriching uranium despite international demands, and they've rejected the idea of relying on imported uranium fuel.
And their cooperation with the IAEA hasn't been great lately either.
No, that's compounding international concerns.
Yeah.
Iran has moved to suspend cooperation with the IAEA in some areas, denied key inspection requests since 2021, and the IAEA has explicitly noted Iran's general lack of cooperation and the persistent troubling presence of unexplained traces of uranium at undeclared sites.
Which suggests activities they aren't being transparent about.
It certainly raises serious questions. It paints a picture of a nation, well, pushing the boundaries of its international obligations.
Okay, so given all these complexities, the strikes, the remaining capabilities, Iran's steadfast position, let's talk about the diplomatic crossroads ahead.
Where do we go from here?
Exactly. The 2015 deal, the JCPOA, that seems to be no longer a viable framework.
Generally agreed, yes. Primarily because the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from it back in 2018.
And since then, Iran has ramped up its program way beyond the deal's limits.
Correct. So the focus now has to be on negotiating a completely new, effective, and crucially, a verifiable nuclear agreement.
So what would that look like? What are the key elements?
Well, for any new deal to even have a chance, the U.S. needs to articulate truly realistic objectives, meaning demands for complete dismantlement or zero enrichment are probably considered not realistic from a pure non-proliferation standpoint.
And Iran would reject those out of hand.
Almost certainly. They are seen by Tehran as a non-starter, signaling to them that the U.S. is maybe not serious about diplomacy.
Why is that? Is it just pride or something deeper?
It's partly linked to the Libya model analogy, which Iran views as a profound threat to its security.
Ah, right. Gaddafi giving up his program and then being overthrown later.
Exactly. In 2003, Libya gave up its nascent nuclear program for sanctions relief and rapprochement, only for Gaddafi to be overthrown years later during the Arab Spring with Western intervention.
So Iran sees that as a cautionary tale.
They interpret it as giving up strategic leverage can leave you vulnerable. So Iran wants a strong guarantee it can quickly restore leverage if the U.S., say, pulls out of a future deal or fails to follow through on commitments.
Okay, so realism is key. What should the focus be then, if not zero enrichment?
The focus probably needs to shift towards maximizing transparency and reducing proliferation risk with quickly implementable measures.
Like more inspections.
Yes. Increased monitoring is absolutely crucial. That means granting IAEA inspectors robust, unfettered access to all facilities supporting Iran's nuclear program.
Including places they haven't had access to before?
Ideally, yes. The reimplementation and maybe even permanent ratification of the additional protocol is seen as a key priority.
What does that protocol allow?
It provides for short-notice inspections and, critically, access to sensitive facilities like centrifuge manufacturing workshops, not just declared nuclear sites.
Okay.
Beyond that, incorporating things like online enrichment monitoring, continuous surveillance technology could help enhance transparency.
And what about the enrichment levels and stockpiles themselves?
That's the other core component, strict restrictions on enrichment. The fundamental goal has to be significantly increasing that breakout time, the time needed for a bomb from its current near-zero level.
How do you do that?
You could try to limit enrichment levels strictly to reactor grade, less than 5%, and drastically reducing those stockpiles of enriched uranium, especially the 20% and 60%.
Because letting them keep the 60% stuff is just too risky.
It poses a significant proliferation risk, yes, mainly because there's no practical civilian need for uranium enriched to that level. It's really only useful as a stepping stone to weapons grade.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned Iran might be open to talks on weaponization prohibitions.
Yes, that's an intriguing possibility. While Iran consistently denies pursuing nuclear weapons, they have apparently suggested they might be open to talks specifically focused on preventing weaponization.
So, distinguishing between making the fuel and making the bomb itself.
Exactly. This could include restrictions on activities directly relevant to developing an explosive package, fabricating weapons-grade uranium into bomb components. Things like a ban on uranium metal production.
That could be a potential avenue for negotiation then.
It could be. It's also advised that for any serious negotiation, the current administration needs to consult closely with the E3.
France, Germany, UK.
Right. Consult with them on technical parameters, retain and really leverage deep U.S. non-proliferation expertise, and build a dedicated, empowered negotiating team with a senior point person.
So a coordinated, expert-driven approach.
Essential for something this complex.
Now, what about all the other regional issues? The missiles, the proxies. Iran apparently doesn't want those in a nuclear deal.
Correct. They've indicated they don't want regional security addressed within a nuclear deal. However, reducing broader regional tensions could indirectly lessen Iran's motivation to weaponize.
So maybe parallel talks?
Possibly. Discussions on wider security issues could occur in parallel. Maybe foster transparency and confidence through cooperative regional nuclear activities. Things like sharing nuclear security best practices, joint training, perhaps shared investment in research for civil benefits, agriculture, medicine.
Building trust in other areas might help.
That's the idea. But there's a very real limited time frame for all this diplomacy, isn't there?
Yes, the clock is ticking. If no significant verifiable progress is made by mid-2025, the E3 France, Germany, UK will likely move to restore UN Security Council sanctions on Iran.
The snapback mechanism.
Exactly. This would reimpose prohibitions on uranium enrichment, reactor development, ballistic missile activities, basically reverting to a much harsher international stance.
And Iran's reaction to that would likely be?
They would highly likely follow through on their stated threat to withdraw from the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Which would be a major escalation.
A huge one. It could dramatically increase the risk of military action, although there's a wrinkle.
Oh.
Iran's existing nuclear cooperation agreement with Russia might obligate it to retain some IAEA presence even outside the NPT. So that creates a complex legal and political tangle.
Fascinating. Always layers upon layers.
Always. So looking at the broader implications now, deterrence remains a huge factor, right? Tensions are still high.
Very much so. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has publicly directed the IDF to prepare comprehensive plans for additional operations against Iran if necessary.
The goal being?
To preserve air superiority and, crucially, to definitively prevent any reconstruction of Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. They're signaling they won't let Iran rebuild easily.
And Iran's response?
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araki issued a stark warning of retaliation against potential future Israeli strikes. He stated, and this phrase is key, Iran is not Lebanon.
What's the significance of Iran is not Lebanon?
Well, Lebanon has frequently seen Israeli strikes against Hezbollah targets without a major military counterresponse from the Lebanese state itself.
Right. It's often contained or directed at the proxy.
Exactly. By saying Iran is not Lebanon, Haraki is signaling that Iran views itself as a direct sovereign power that will not tolerate ongoing strikes on its territory without a robust, direct counterresponse, distinguishing itself from those proxy dynamics.
A clear warning then, and President Trump has also weighed in.
Yes, he publicly underscored this dynamic, stating Iran will never rebuild their nuclear facilities and directly suggesting further strikes if it does. So the rhetoric remains very strong.
Internally in Iran, what's happening? There are reports of crackdowns.
Yes, the regime seems to be taking significant counterintelligence steps that likely reflect the regime's paranoia about Israeli infiltration.
Such as?
Mass arrests. Over 700 Iranians arrested on political or security charges, with some alleged to be Mossad spies.
And the fear is this could be used more broadly.
Exactly. This widespread crackdown could unfortunately be used as justification for broader crackdowns on society within Iran itself, adding another layer of internal tension and repression.
And what about Iran's big allies, like Russia and China? Have they stepped in?
Well, what's notable, and maybe a warning signal for others, is the limited external support Iran received in the immediate aftermath.
Really?
Despite significant historical ties, neither China nor Russia has offered more than public statements of support to Iran since the Israeli strikes began, according to these analyses.
Just statements, no concrete action.
Apparently not. And the assessment suggests this should be the canary in the coal mine to other nations who look to China and Russia as potential partners, signaling perhaps that they are not reliable when it comes to direct intervention in these kinds of critical security crises.
Interesting observation, but amidst all this crisis, all this tension, is there also maybe an opportunity?
That's the argument some are making. The recent strikes, according to our sources, bought the world more time to find a negotiated solution that will convince Iran to give up its ambitions to develop a nuclear weapon.
So the strikes created space for diplomacy.
That's the hope. The argument here is that negotiations from a position of strength backed by the ability to strike again have more of a chance now than they did last week, potentially opening a more productive, albeit tense, diplomatic path forward.
So wrapping this up, what does all of this complex, intertwined information mean for you, the listener?
Well, this isn't just some distant geopolitical chess game. This situation directly impacts global stability.
How so?
It could influence energy markets, for one. And it certainly raises the fundamental risk of nuclear proliferation, affecting international security for everyone, but potentially sparking broader conflicts.
So understanding these dynamics is absolutely key to being truly well-informed in our interconnected world, right? Seeing beyond the headlines to the strategic implications.
Absolutely essential.
Okay, so let's recap. We've seen how recent military action has significantly impacted Iran's nuclear facilities, but certainly not eliminated its underlying know-how, or crucially, those dangerous stockpiles of enriched uranium.
Right. The knowledge and the material are still key concerns.
We've also explored the incredibly complex diplomatic tightrope ahead, realistic objectives, stringent monitoring, maybe parallel security discussions. They're all on the table.
All while the looming threat of escalation persists. It's a very fine line.
So let's leave our listeners with a final thought. Given Iran's persistent assertion of its right to enrich and its demonstrated capacity to rebound quickly,
And considering the varied interpretations of how effective this military action really was in the long term.
how do you think the international community should prioritize its efforts now? Is the main focus preventing any further enrichment at any level?
Or should it shift more acutely to preventing actual weaponization activities, perhaps while acknowledging Iran might retain some enrichment capability under strict monitoring? It's a tough balance.
And what role do you believe sustained international pressure, combined with this current position of strength, should play? Can that combination secure a long-term, verifiable peace in a region so prone to conflict?
Really complex questions. It's a deep dive that definitely continues well beyond our conversation today.